Hello everybody, welcome back to the Yotso Tech Tracks YouTube channel. This will be the final video for now regarding the rear suspension lift I put on this 2016 Ram 1500 pickup truck. If you guys have followed along from earlier videos, I already finished the front and I'm almost completed the rear. Basically, I put this suspension lift kit together myself for as cheaply as possible without compromising quality or performance. The front is basically an upper control arm and a spacer kit with a shock absorber that you can tell is already installed. You can check out previous videos regarding that one. If you see the paint, I just used up whatever leftover POR 15 I had. It's all very wet still, so I don't want to touch anything because it's going to be very difficult to clean up. As you guys can see, I got it all over myself. It's something that's unavoidable no matter how careful I am, but because I'm holding the camera right now, I want to stay a little bit further away from these parts. Back to the rear. Basically, as I mentioned to you guys, this is supposed to be a 2-inch kit. This aluminum machine block spacer fits right into the spring perch, and the coil spring seats very nicely right inside. Everything is nice and even on both sides. It's sitting flush, and I'm very happy with the way it turned out. This one was advertised as a 2-inch kit, however with the tape measure it's very close to 2 3/8 of an inch, just a little bit more than that. It's less than 2.5, but it is what it is. So I'm very happy with that, no complaints. A couple of millimeters or 3/8 of an inch up and down is not much of a difference. It's pretty much unnoticeable. The shock absorber extension bracket, as I mentioned, is not designed for this vehicle. However, it was a very good deal I found online, and I'm very happy with that too. This kind of a design basically lifts it up 2 inches, so it's very close to the lift height of the coil spring spacer. However, it twists the shock absorber 90 degrees. No matter what you're going to do when the suspension cycles up and down, the bushing inside the shock absorber is going to be moving around, and there's plenty of movement. You can tell it's still very wet if the camera can pick it up. I used all the paint I had just to make sure any scratches I put on the parts are going to be coated now, and I don't want to see too much rust. When it dries up, it'll be a nice flat chassis black. I believe this is a high temperature version of the POR 15. That's just what I had laying around, but in the other time when I have a chance, I'm going to coat the whole axle, maybe get the truck undercoated. This truck never had any touch-up paint on it, any undercoating, so this is 5 years of Canadian winters what you're seeing. Some of the parts are a little bit rusty, however it's just surface rust. This truck is very nice shape, there's no accidents, so I want to keep it as nicely as possible. I also changed out the brake pads in the rear. This surface rust you see on the rotor is pretty insignificant, minimal. It'll clean up driving down the road after a couple of miles. I put new brake pads on it just because I took everything apart. For this suspension lift kit install, it was very difficult for me to remove these coil springs. These are actually very long coil springs, and to get it fully unseated, I'm not sure how high this truck is right now. I lifted it up with a couple of wooden blocks and axle stands, and I had to drop this axle down quite a lot. So this coil spring is very, very long. One thing, I have coil spring compressors which clamp these coil springs together to make the coil spring a little bit more manageable. However, on this install I didn't want to go with that method because I already have these Firestone airbags inside, and I don't want to scratch them up with the jaws because that tool is a very heavy duty and it's got huge jaws and it might scratch this airbag up, and the last thing I want to do is put any kind of a weakness in these bags. They have to be pretty much as smooth and scratch free as possible. So I basically disconnected the sway bar end links. I took off the brake caliper. That's just two 10mm bolts, and the wheel speed sensor, which is this other line you guys can see. This one is plenty long enough for the axle to drop all the way down to the ground. Pretty much the truck was at this height, and this is with the truck sitting on its weight on these wooden blocks. They are underneath the axle, so I pretty much had to drop the axle almost a foot from this orientation to get the coil spring out. But once it was out, these spacers go right in, They fit right onto the spring perches. These things are machined on the inside to accept the axle, and the spring sits right on top of them with a nice secure fit. So that went very well. These shock absorber brackets, again, they are a really nice addition to make sure that you have full down travel. Roughly this truck has 8 to 9 inches of travel. I forgot the specifications. It's somewhere between 8 to 9 inches, so it has about roughly 4 inches of up travel and 4 inches of down travel when the weight of the vehicle is on the axle. I did not bother making a bump stop extension. However, it is very easy for this vehicle. If you guys can see, let me zoom in a little bit more. This pad that is going to contact this upper bump stop, if the axle does travel long enough, I would actually have to make a 2-inch spacer here, which is very easy because this bracket already has holes in it. It is very similar to a Jeep JK and up axle that Chrysler uses. It's just a 5-link solid axle, 4 links plus a panhard rod that you can see here. This is the lateral link. Anyway, the Jeep designs all have the same suspension kits where they just mount either a plastic or a metal block right on here, which I can do that in the future. The reason I didn't bother to go with that right now, because I do have these Firestone 1000 airbags. Right now I'm just using about 10 psi, 10 pounds per square inch for the extra load capacity, because I have quite a lot of weight into the back of the truck. I'm hauling a lot of cargo most of the time, and because I do have these airbags in, I'm not too concerned about the suspension cycling all the way up, over traveling and maybe damaging the shock absorber, because if you guys can imagine, this airbag system within the coil spring acts as a cushion and is going to increase the spring rate by however much pressure you put into them. Right now I have 10, but I believe they're at 60 psi's maximum, so they can handle quite a lot of weight, which will actually prevent the axle from hitting that bump stop too much, because it's going to basically increase the spring rate, which is for me not a concern about making bump stop extensions anytime soon. So with that said, I have no complaints about this so far. When this axle does fully extend and all the way down for the travel, the brake lines are still not tight, so I didn't have to make any extra brake line extensions. I didn't have to touch these brackets from the factory. That this little bracket is bolted here all the way up to the chassis, so I didn't have to touch that. It is still not putting any pressure on these brake lines when the axle is all the way down, which is perfect. No complaints about that. Let me take you guys to the other side. The emergency brake lines are still very happy with the way they are. There's no tension on them. The wheels spin very freely, and everything functions in factory or close to factory specifications. The sway bar end links, I did not make a drop bracket for them. They are very close to being in a parallel position. So is this panhard rod, if you guys can see, which is this one. It's a lateral link for the axle, as well as these trailing arms. These are always best to be as close to parallel to the ground as possible for optimal suspension dynamics. However, for this 2-inch lift kit, I don't really see a need to make a drop bracket for that, or these trailing arms for the axle. Everything looks like it's going to function properly, and I should be very happy with this install for the long run. I'm going to double check some of the hardware after a couple of 100 kilometers of driving. You always should, just to be sure everything is tightened, doesn't come loose. But beyond that, everything went very well, very easy. The rear suspension on these trucks is always much easier to work on it than the front. There's not much to it. As I mentioned, the back only consists of spacer and a shock absorber drop bracket. The front was a lot more involved. There's a lot more parts, and also the alignment had to be done for the front. On my previous videos, you guys can check that out. I did a quick, easy do-it-yourself driveway alignment. However, for the rear, it's not a concern. Most of these trucks, the only alignment that is critical on the rear is going to be the thrust angle, which is basically how the rear axle is going to influence the truck driving down the road as far as it wanting to pull to the right or pull to the left. However, that is not a critical alignment when you're dropping the suspension 2 inches. Everything is just going to be up a little bit higher, and I'll zoom back a little bit for you guys now. This is pretty much the way the truck is going to sit driving down the road. The rear is going to be a little bit higher, which is exactly what I want. And when I put the small camper trailer in the back, it will push down on the trailer ball a little bit, and it will make it very close to parallel, which is exactly what I wanted. I want the back end to be a little bit higher than the front. Not too much, but just a little bit. So I hope you guys enjoy these videos. I will be making many more regarding in-close details about control arms and drive shaft alignment angles. I'm going to post all these links about when this truck is lifted about 2 to 4 inches, how those angles get affected regarding the CV drive shafts, the rear drive shafts, suspension control arm angles, steering component angles, and so on. I don't find too much information on the internet about that, just about the ranges that people say you should stay within. So I'm going to post some of those numbers up to help out the community. Maybe other people can find this information useful. So thanks guys for watching, and see you next time on the Yotso Tech Tracks YouTube channel. Take care. Bye bye.